The table was never supposed to break. It was a professional arm wrestling table, imported from Sweden, built from reinforced oak designed to withstand years of punishment from the strongest competitors on the planet. It had survived hundreds of matches, men weighing over 250 pounds slamming arms into it with full force without so much as a crack. Yet on a cold November afternoon in 1971, inside the Los Angeles Sports Arena, that table split clean down the middle. Not after a long struggle, not after minutes of grinding pressure. 4 seconds. 4 seconds into a match no one believed should even happen. On one side of the table sat Margaret, the Mountain O'Brien. At 260 pounds, she was the undisputed queen of arm wrestling. 7 consecutive world championships, over 200 professional victories. She had crushed opponents across Europe, North America, and the Soviet Union, many of them men who believed strength alone made them unbeatable. Her right arm measured 19 inches around the bicep, bigger than most men's thighs. She could curl 185 pounds for repetitions without straining. Sports journalists had stopped trying to be clever with descriptions and simply called her the strongest woman alive. No one had proof to dispute it. On the other side of the table sat Bruce Lee, 140 pounds, lean, compact, quiet. He wasn't supposed to be there. Bruce Lee had come to the International Strength Athletes exhibition to support a friend competing in the deadlift event. He wasn't scheduled to appear, wasn't promoted, and wasn't involved in any exhibition matches. He stood near the arm wrestling stage between events, observing, quietly, watching hands, elbows, shoulders, studying mechanics the way others watched for spectacle. A journalist recognized him and asked about his upcoming film projects. It was a casual interview, nothing more. But Margaret noticed instantly. She had spent her career commanding attention simply by sitting down at a table, yet the cameras were slowly drifting toward a small, calm man speaking softly about martial arts and filmmaking. Curious, she walked over. She hadn't recognized him, she hadn't seen his movies, but she noticed his size instantly. "You're a movie star?" she asked, extending her massive hand. Bruce shook it politely. The moment their hands connected, he felt it. Dense, controlled strength. Not sloppy, not aggressive, just power, sitting comfortably where it belonged. "I make films, martial arts films," Bruce replied calmly. Margaret smiled, not mockingly, not cruelly, genuinely curious. "With that frame, you must use a lot of camera tricks. No offense, you look like you weigh about 140 pounds. "I weigh exactly 140 pounds. And yes, I use camera techniques, but most of what you see is real technique applied efficiently." A nearby journalist sensed a story forming. "Margaret," he said, "would you arm wrestle him? World champion versus movie star? It'd make great photos." Margaret laughed, not out of arrogance, but concern. "I'd hurt him. I outweigh him 120 pounds. I just beat the Soviet champion 3 weeks ago. This isn't fair." Bruce nodded. He understood her hesitation wasn't ego, it was responsibility. "I appreciate that. I don't expect to win. I'm interested in the mechanics, if you're willing." Margaret studied him. No bravado, no challenge, no attempt to prove anything. "All right," she said finally, "but we stop immediately if I think you're about to get injured." Within minutes, exhibition organizers cleared the stage. The official arm wrestling table was moved into the center spotlight. Word spread through the arena. Spectators abandoned other events and gathered around the stage. Everyone wanted to see the mismatch. When they sat down, the difference was impossible to ignore. Margaret's arm looked like a tree trunk next to Bruce's. When they clasped hands, her grip completely engulfed his. The referee adjusted their elbows, checked wrist alignment, and confirmed readiness. Standard rules: no fouls, no lifting elbows, ready position.
Margaret set her shoulder and applied about 30% of her strength, standard practice when facing a much smaller opponent, enough to establish control without risking injury. Bruce felt pressure immediately. Not pain, but pressure. Dense, overwhelming force traveling through his arm into his shoulder and spine. Ready? Go. Margaret increased to 50%, expecting an immediate pen. It didn't happen. Bruce's arm held. It trembled slightly, muscles firing in coordinated tension, but it didn't collapse. The crowd murmured. Surviving wasn't victory, but surviving against this level of force was already impossible by conventional standards. Margaret increased to 70%, the level she used to defeat experienced male competitors. Bruce's entire body engaged, feet pressing into the floor, core tightening, spine aligning. His arm bent a few degrees toward defeat, but did not break structure. Margaret frowned. She had expected resistance. She hadn't expected stability. Her competitive instinct kicked in. She committed to 90% of her strength, the level she had used to dominate world-class opponents. Bruce's arm dipped about 15 degrees toward the losing position. His muscles shook, his breathing tightened. Then something changed. Bruce subtly adjusted his wrist angle, shifted his shoulder, not opposing the force, but redirecting it, causing part of Margaret's power to slide past its strongest line. The table made a sound, a low creak. The referee leaned in. "Hold position," he warned. Margaret, now fully committed and frustrated that the match hadn't ended instantly, applied everything she had. Bruce made a decision that shocked everyone watching. He released. Not defeat, not collapse, release. And physics took over.
The moment Bruce Lee released resistance, the laws of physics took control. Margaret O'Brien had committed fully, every fiber in her arm, shoulder, back, and torso driving power in a single direction. She expected opposition. She expected something solid to push against. Instead, the resistance vanished. Her force had nowhere to go except forward. The effect was immediate and violent. The oak table absorbed the sudden surge of unopposed power compounded by Bruce's simultaneous shift in body structure. Margaret's downward force collided with Bruce's redirected vector, creating a stress pattern the table was never designed to handle. There was no warning crack, no gradual failure, just a sharp, explosive snap that echoed across the arena like a gunshot. The table split cleanly down the middle. Both competitors lurched forward as the surface collapsed beneath them, still gripping each other's hands, landing amid broken oak and shattered hardware. The sound of splintering wood rolled through the crowd, followed by something far more unsettling: silence. For 3 full seconds, no one spoke. The referee stood frozen, whistle half raised, eyes locked on the wreckage. The journalists forgot to write. The audience forgot to breathe. Professional arm wrestling tables did not break, not ever. Margaret was the first to move. She released Bruce's hand and stared at the table in disbelief, then at her own arm, flexing it slowly, as if checking whether reality itself had malfunctioned. "I've competed for 12 years, she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. 40 countries, over 200 matches. This has never happened." Bruce sat up slowly, rolling his shoulder, wincing slightly. The release had saved his arm, but not without cost. His joints had absorbed shock waves few people ever experienced. He leaned forward, examining the broken oak with focused curiosity. He believed, he said calmly, we exceeded the table's tensile limits. That sentence alone silenced the room again. The exhibition organizers rushed forward, alarmed. The table had cost over $1,000 and was imported specifically for professional use. Liability questions flew through their minds.
Margaret's coach checked her arm, palpating muscle and tendon, expecting injury. There was none. Bruce's friend Dave helped him to his feet, concern written across his face. The referee finally found his voice. "Due to equipment failure," he announced over the arena speakers, "the match is declared null and void. No winner, no loser." Then he paused. "I've been refereeing for 20 years. I've never seen anything like this." Margaret walked toward Bruce, extending her hand again, this time not as a competitor, but as a student. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I assumed because you were small and from movies that you had no real strength. That was ignorant." Bruce shook her hand, respectful as always. "What you did wasn't just technique," she continued. "I felt what 260-pound men can generate. You matched that pressure at 140 pounds, just differently." Bruce nodded. "Your strength comes from mass and leverage developed through years of focused training. Mine comes from integration, ground force, neural efficiency, and structural alignment." She listened intently. "You generate power locally, from arm and shoulder. I generate it globally, from the feet through the legs, hips, spine, and core, all channeling through the arm." Margaret exhaled slowly. "That explains why it felt like pushing against the floor, not just your arm." They sat together for nearly 30 minutes after the exhibition ended, surrounded by broken oak and curious officials, discussing biomechanics like two engineers dissecting a failure point. Margaret admitted something few champions ever do. "I rely on overwhelming force," she said. "I've never needed to think beyond that. What you did exposed a weakness." Bruce didn't take credit. "Strength without structure wastes energy. Structure without strength collapses. Tonight, neither failed, but the table did." Journalists struggled to categorize what they had witnessed. Was it a strength contest? A technical demonstration? A physics experiment? One reporter contacted structural engineers, sending photographs of the broken table. Their calculations suggested that splitting oak of that thickness would require over 4,000 pounds of concentrated pressure. No single human could generate that. But two force systems colliding at opposing angles? That was different. Margaret continued competing for 3 more years, retiring undefeated in 1974. In interviews, she frequently referenced the Bruce Lee match as the most educational moment of her career. "It taught me that raw strength has limits. Technique extends them." Bruce incorporated the incident into his teaching philosophy, using it to demonstrate how intelligent force application could neutralize size disadvantages, though never eliminate them entirely. The Swedish table manufacturer requested fragments of the broken oak for analysis. Their engineers confirmed that the failure occurred due to an unusual shear pattern, stress applied in multiple vectors simultaneously. They redesigned their tables afterward. The incident was never replicated. November 1971. 1 table, 2 competitors, 2 philosophies of strength, and a failure that forced science to reconsider where human power truly comes from.
In the weeks following the exhibition, the broken table became more famous than the event itself. Photos of the split oak circulated through sports magazines, biomechanics journals, and engineering forums. Arm wrestling communities debated endlessly. Some claimed faulty wood, others blamed improper table design. A few insisted the story had been exaggerated, but the footage told a different story. The organizers had captured the match from 3 angles: no cuts, no edits, no tricks. The cameras showed exactly 4 seconds of action, 4 seconds that refused to fit inside existing models of strength. Structural engineers were the first to weigh in. Oak of that density and thickness, reinforced with steel brackets beneath, was rated to withstand several thousand pounds of downward pressure when force was applied along its intended axis.
What it was not designed for was torsional shear, rotational stress applied unevenly across the grain. That was the key. Margaret O'Brien's force had been linear, direct, and overwhelming, straight toward the pin pad. Bruce Lee's movement had subtly altered the direction of resistance at the precise moment Margaret reached full commitment. Instead of force meeting force, the table absorbed force meeting redirection. The engineers explained it simply. When pressure is applied in conflicting vectors at the same moment, materials fail faster than when pressure is applied uniformly. In other words, the table didn't lose to strength, it lost to physics being used creatively. Biomechanics experts were next. They studied Bruce's posture frame by frame, freezing the footage at the moment before collapse. What they saw surprised even Olympic-level analysts. Bruce's feet were planted, not wide, not narrow, but positioned to allow torque transfer. His hips were rotated slightly counterclockwise. His spine remained vertical, acting as a transmission column. His shoulder wasn't pushing, it was anchoring. Most arm wrestlers isolate the arm. Bruce didn't. He turned his entire body into a lever system. Margaret's movement, by contrast, was textbook arm wrestling power, mass-driven, shoulder-engaged, dominant side fully committed. Her technique was flawless within her discipline. But when Bruce released resistance, her force didn't disappear, it accelerated. That acceleration, combined with Bruce's rotational shift, produced a sudden spike in stress that the table absorbed in full. One biomechanics paper summarized it bluntly. The table failed not due to excessive force, but due to incompatible force resolution occurring simultaneously. Translation: the table didn't lose to strength, it lost to physics being used creatively. Sports scientists became interested in Bruce Lee's neural efficiency. Electromyography readings, taken in later demonstrations, showed something unusual. Bruce's muscle activation occurred in coordinated waves rather than isolated bursts. His nervous system fired muscle groups sequentially, reducing wasted motion and internal resistance. This wasn't strength in the traditional sense, it was efficiency. Where most athletes max out by pushing harder, Bruce maxed out by wasting less. That efficiency allowed him to survive forces far above what his body mass suggested. Margaret, in later interviews, explained what it felt like from her perspective. It was like trying to push a door, she said, and suddenly the hinges moved instead of the door opening. She hadn't been overpowered, she had been misdirected. The arm wrestling community quietly changed after that event. Training methods evolved. Coaches began emphasizing body alignment, torque control, and force direction instead of pure arm strength. Reinforced tables became standard. No one wanted another legend breaking under live competition. Bruce Lee, meanwhile, never sought credit. When asked about the incident years later, he dismissed it as an interesting exchange of ideas, but those close to him understood what it represented. Bruce wasn't trying to prove he was stronger than Margaret O'Brien. He was proving something far more dangerous. That strength was not a single quality. That size, power, and mass were variables, not guarantees. That intelligence applied to movement could rival raw force in ways people weren't prepared to accept. Margaret retired undefeated, her reputation intact, her legacy expanded. She became a vocal advocate for technical training, crediting the Bruce Lee match for extending her career. Bruce Lee continued refining his philosophy. Absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, add what is specifically your own. The table had failed because it could not adapt. The humans did. The footage remains studied to this day, not because it shows a winner or a loser, but because it captures a moment when two extreme expressions of human potential collided and produced something neither side intended. Not victory, not defeat, but revelation. In the months after the exhibition, the incident quietly reshaped how people inside elite strength circles thought about power. Not publicly, not loudly, but permanently. Margaret O'Brien returned to competition with the same reputation she had always carried: undefeated, dominant, feared at the table. To the outside world, nothing had changed. She continued winning matches, pinning challengers in seconds, her right arm still the most dangerous limb in the sport. Yet those close to her noticed something different. She no longer rushed to overpower opponents. She adjusted her stance more carefully. She studied wrist angles longer. She conserved strength where she once spent it freely. In private training sessions, she replayed the Bruce Lee footage over and over, not searching for flaws, but for understanding. "I realized," she later admitted, "that strength without control is loud, but limited." For the first time in her career, Margaret began training with lighter weights, not to build muscle, but to refine leverage. She practiced rotational pulls, grip angles, shoulder alignment. She brought in coaches outside arm wrestling, wrestlers, gymnasts, even a fencing instructor who specialized in balance and reaction. Her power didn't diminish, it sharpened. Meanwhile, Bruce Lee absorbed the experience in his own way. He didn't talk about it on talk shows. He didn't use it as promotional material. He didn't frame it as a victory. But those who trained with him noticed subtle changes in his teaching. Bruce began emphasizing structural integrity over speed drills. He talked more about force pathways, how power traveled through the body like current through a wire. He demonstrated how poor alignment leaked strength, how tension blocked speed, how relaxation created control. Strength, he told students, is not what you add, it's what you stop wasting. The arm wrestling match became an unspoken reference point. Whenever someone questioned whether technique could truly offset size, Bruce would simply smile and adjust their stance. The lesson wasn't theoretical. It had shattered Swedish oak. The sports science community struggled with the implications. Most models at the time treated strength as a measurable output: muscle size, torque, force production. Bruce's movement didn't violate those principles, but it exposed something they hadn't accounted for: coordination density. How much of the body participated in a single action? Bruce used nearly every major muscle group in his resistance, not simultaneously, but sequentially, like a whip transferring energy from handle to tip. Margaret's power had been enormous, but localized. Bruce's was smaller, but integrated. When those systems collided, neither dominated. They destabilized the environment instead. This realization forced scientists to reconsider assumptions. Maybe strength wasn't just about how much force you could generate. Maybe it was about how well you could manage force under unpredictable conditions. That idea would later influence Olympic lifting techniques, combat sports conditioning, and even physical therapy models focused on whole body movement rather than isolated muscle rehabilitation. But in 1971, it was still unsettling, because it suggested something uncomfortable: that the human body, properly trained, could perform far closer to its theoretical limits than previously believed, and that those limits were not evenly distributed. Bruce Lee embodied that imbalance. He wasn't the strongest man in the room. He wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the fastest in a straight line, but he was the most efficient. Efficiency, it turned out, was dangerous. Margaret and Bruce met once again, years later, at a private training seminar. There was no rematch, no table, no audience, just conversation. They spoke about aging, training, injury, and longevity. Margaret admitted that the Bruce Lee match extended her career, not by making her stronger, but by making her smarter. Bruce listened more than he spoke. When asked whether he thought he could have ever beaten her outright in arm wrestling, he shook his head. "No," he said simply, and that was never the point. The point had been discovery, the realization that power took many forms, and that misunderstanding those forms was what broke tables, careers, and sometimes bodies. When Bruce Lee passed away in 1973, stories about him multiplied rapidly. Some became exaggerated, others mythologized, a few drifted into fantasy. But among strength athletes, the arm wrestling incident remained grounded. It wasn't supernatural, it wasn't luck. It was two elite systems colliding under conditions neither had fully prepared for. And when those systems met, the environment failed, not the humans. That distinction mattered. Margaret retired undefeated in 1974. In her farewell interview, she was asked which match she remembered most. She didn't hesitate, the one that didn't finish, because it taught her more than all the victories combined. Bruce Lee's philosophy continued influencing generations after his death. His emphasis on adaptability, efficiency, and intelligence in movement became foundational principles in modern martial arts. The broken table itself disappeared. Pieces were reportedly stored by organizers for years before being discarded during a facility renovation. No museum claimed it, no trophy case displayed it, but the idea it represented survived. That strength is not a single axis, that force without understanding is incomplete, and that when two extremes meet, raw power and refined control, the outcome may not be dominance, it may be transformation. The match lasted 4 seconds. Its impact is still unfolding.